Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra,
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people.
associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked.
and sometimes what didn't,
You will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts.
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Today, I continue my conversation with Bill Hall, the president of Simulation Studios. In the last episode, he shared how he got the idea of starting Simulation Studios and what are some of the key characteristics and elements needed for managing a successful transformation. And of course, the role of technology and the metrics that need to be identified to show the progress of any transformational initiative. In this conversation, he talks about some of his professional failures when he was given large responsibilities at a very young age, how no decision is a bad decision, and how Sims enable executives to get a feel for the impact of their decisions and learn from that experience. The role of software in simulations and the exercises he runs, as well as a quick walkthrough of how a sim is run. The aspects of an organization that need to be built into a simulation and how he kind of models them as rules and formulas and all that. And what are, let's say, some of the typical qualities that a person needs or can develop to be someone like Bill? And that was a very interesting answer. The essential thing is about giving things a go and learning from that experience, and how he is able to communicate with all levels and roles within an organization, and how he understands even complex organizations very quickly. I particularly liked when he mentioned that he dumps all his ideas, more like a brain dump, on butcher paper, and then visually that helps him organize his thoughts. About taking a break and breathing in nature, for instance, to organize the thoughts before doing a brain dump. And another essential technique that he talks about is how cascading learnings in an organization by training trainers or training the learners also to be trainers. And he talk about the relevance of simulation-based tools to enable high-performing teams and whether that can be accelerated and a group of individuals can become high-performing teams very quickly. He also talks about what he reads. And finally, we touch upon the limits of simulation. Overall, I learned a lot in terms of managing transformations or in helping organizations understand the complexities of transformation, particularly for turnarounds. Listen on. The role of a leader in this kind of a turnaround or any change that you bring in, from probably being an individual contributor and one takes on a leadership role, and then taking on a larger role, taking the team with you. So does simulation help there? This is more about from the individual's perspective. You mentioned that these sims work very well with behavioral kind of learning. So if I have been pretty much an individual contributor or I've been running a very small team, now suddenly I'm faced with much bigger challenges, operate at a larger scale. Behaviorally, are there things that I can learn through simulations?
Yes, that's a great question. And I'm going to back up a little bit because I should have mentioned this before because I think it is an important aspect. In my career, I've had some pretty spectacular failures, right? I was promoted young. I had a lot of responsibility when I was young. I'm still young, but I was younger, and I think I had too much responsibility for my age. And in turnarounds, things are so chaotic. There's not much oversight, very little organization, very little training. It's just panic mode, right? And I made some bunk decisions. I mean, there's no such thing as a bad decision, right? Any decision is better than no decision, right? But there was a lot of stuff that I learned from that. And that was also kind of the impetus to doing the simulation stuff, because the sims allow people to learn in a safe place as opposed to learning something that impacts people's lives, right? That's a biggie. That's just such a biggie, and the sim removes that fear, or that not that fear, that risk element. So there's a lot of behavioral stuff that I learned from those experiences, right? And the sim definitely allows people, you don't experience it in the same visceral way that you do, watching people's lives be impacted, but you definitely experience the, whoa, okay, I made this decision as an exec inside the sim, and now I see this massive ripple effect that I would never have seen before. So an example is, if I make all this, if I invest all this money into R&D inside the sim, right? All of a sudden in the sim, you see, oh my gosh, I've completely starved my sales and marketing group, right? So the sim really does demonstrate all the kind of cross-functional dependencies that any big organization has. So behaviorally, they can experience that. Now, that's what I'll call the quantitative side of things. The qualitative side of things is they can definitely experience out the positive impact of effective leadership as defined by the company they're working for. So you'll take the company's leadership competency model, and they have to utilize that competency model to be able to effectively make decisions inside the sim, which they will then experience the positive change that occurs based on that, utilizing or demonstrating effective leadership, we'll say. So huge behavioral component, if not even more than the quantitative side, which surprises people inside of a software-based solution. They always think numbers and numbers and numbers, and no, there's a lot of behavior stuff.
I thought I heard you say that there is a lot of software that goes into the simulation. Where does that fit in, or where do you use the software?
Yeah, so the simulation is usually software these days. I'm a huge fan of paper-based as well, solutions, but a lot of them today are computer-based. So the simulations are, well, just for the sake of simplicity, for this case, is say it's software-based. So the software is in very close harmonics or partnerships, you don't call it harmonics, with facilitation, with the corporate strategy, with the corporate leadership objectives, with the behavioral component. There's all these things that the sim needs to harmonize with within the company, within the actual facilitation training program itself, leadership development program itself, and that brings in all those kind of learning objectives. So funny enough, most people would be surprised at this. I would encourage people to make the sim the actual software component, a small component of that overall puzzle. It just needs to be there to enable all the other components, the leadership, the strategy, the change, the behavior, all that stuff. So it's definitely a big piece of software, but it's a small component of what needs to happen within the leadership change initiative.
So is that like running through multiple short caselets, or is that some huge formula where you just interact with the keyboard and then look at the results, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll kind of go through a quick example. So the most simple example is you take the 25 or so participants, you break them up into teams. They each get a very brief case study. The case study might be a page or two, nothing big. It has some metrics in there, and all it is telling them where they're starting. You're starting the game. What's the backstory? What are we doing here? That stuff, right? Then they'll have some basic data that they need to start to make decisions off of. So kind of think about like a Harvard case study, but just very simplified. And then they start making decisions inside the sim as a team, right? And they're all going to have differences of opinions of how to handle those decisions. Now, what's interesting is the 5 teams are actually competing against each other in real time. So it's not like they make decisions inside the sim, get a score, and say, "Yay, we did great," or "Oh, we didn't do so well." It doesn't work like that, because their decisions are influenced by their competitors in the marketplace. So it really is like a real-time market model, that like a competitive marketplace. So in real time, they're competing against their peers, right, in the room. So it really gets hot and exciting, and it looks like a stock market, trading floor. It really gets chaotic.
Mhm.
And then we'll bring them back, and then during the facilitation, we'll kind of show them through, kind of get through like what happened, who made what decisions, what were the outcomes, why does this matter, but most importantly, what does this mean to the change? What does this mean to, why are we doing this? And usually an executive will come in and kind of talk about, well, you went through this in the sim, we put you through the sim because we're going through these changes, and this is what this means for you in your job in the future. And that gets right back to what the change is, why we're doing it, and how they as individuals fit into that change. So it's a lot of fun. But it's hard. It's a day or two of serious work. People actually put their phones down, which is kind of an indication of engagement. I know, it's a big deal.
Right.
Yeah, big deal. Anyway, so that's how it works. That's kind of operationally how it works.
Okay. So how do these soft aspects come in? For instance, you talked about simulating the market, or the teams kind of competing with each other, where you need to take a stand and take a call, and then how that impacts, or also observe what others are doing, etc.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's usually in close partnership with the company that brings us in, because every company is so different in terms of what they're looking for from a kind of what I'll call the behavioral component. That's usually a lot of where the initial kind of adjustments / tailoring come in, because just as what you were keenly pointed out before, every company has its own culture, its own leadership competency model, its own learning objectives, and that's the stuff that's adjusted quite a bit. So it really does. It really needs to align behind what's important to the company, what the company's culture what the company's culture is, and then how we assess that. So each company is really, really unique. That's why I was saying we can't just drop into a company, turn the key, and go. That would be a waste of money. I would turn that down. I'd say no, that's not going to work. Yeah, but it's a good question.
Yeah, probably a little segue now into what are the qualities that one needs if one wants to be like you.
Oh my gosh. Qualities to be like me. Well, first of all, I'd caution them against it. That's a great question. One thing is, everyone talks about they're not scared of failing. Not only am I not scared of failing, like I actually get excited when I don't do well at something, because I am the type of person that I'm only going to learn this stuff if I slam my head against the wall, right? I probably drove my parents nuts because they probably try to teach me all these great lessons, and I'm like, oh, okay, great, but then I have to go and learn it on my own still, right? So, and I don't think a lot of people are that different. I think a lot of people, I think adults, we learn that way, especially as adults, even as kids. I mean, my kids are 9 and 11, and I watch them do that, and I'm like, yay, you failed, good job, And so I would say not just having a fear of failure, but encouraging failure for growth. So it's that personal growth mindset, I think is important. Also, give it a go, be courageous. We're always so scared of something bad happening. Humans are just amazingly resilient creatures. Give it a go, and don't worry about the possible bad stuff. Whoever's listening, you're probably a lot smarter than you give yourself credit for. I think people are just naturally incredibly gifted, incredibly smart. They just got to give themselves a chance. So I would say, it's not a fear of failure, and give it a go, and you'll, in confidence that you'll figure it out. I don't know if that really answers the question, but I don't think I know myself that well, actually.
Partly because one other thing that I sense is that you interact not only with the senior executives, but you need to also understand the rest of the organization. So how are you able to communicate with people who are performing different roles at different spans of control, etc.?
That is I think I've got I love people. Let me just start with that. Any level, like I don't even think of it as levels. I just love people, right? Everybody has something amazing to give, amazing to share. like my favorite programs to run are like emerging leaders and high performance programs because they're just so excited to learn, right? And that's I just, I get so much excitement, so much, I'll call it currency, just working with anybody and everybody, because everybody's got something that they can teach me, because I'm kind of naturally not smart, but I love learning, and I love learning from people. So I can talk to anyone in any capacity inside of a company. I really enjoy that. It kind of energizes me a bit.
Yeah, on that learning bit, how do you quickly understand the context of the organization that you're going to be working with?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've, companies I've worked with, they've called that out on me. And what I mean by that is, they'll say, how can you ever learn my organization, so fast? And I honestly don't have an answer. I can do it. It's just this stuff, it kind of pours in my brain and I get it quickly. I am completely immersed. I become almost like obsessive compulsive with it. So I just tell them, send me anything and everything you have. And then it turns into me finding tons of stuff to read. I just chew through information and somehow kind of simplify it and distill it down into a sim. That I really love doing a lot. It's an intellectual challenge. And somehow I'm able to digest just reams of information and make a game out of it. But how I do it, I honestly wish I knew, because then I'd write a book on it. And I thought about doing that, but I don't know how it happens. I mean, that's the honest, genuine answer. I wish I had a good formula for it, but every company's so different that each one's different. But it's a great intellectual challenge, and it's incredibly hard. But I don't exactly know how it processes. It's the mystery of the brain.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one rough analogy that I noticed in myself as well is that sometimes you think in terms of PowerPoint or pictures, visual. Sometimes it is more textual. You want to be verbal, you want to write word, or you just get into formulas and you want to put everything into a structure and then try to do that. So is there any such process or a pattern that you've noticed about yourself? How do you organize all the information that is thrown at you?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm gonna back up 1 second, which is just from your questions that we've gone through in the last, 15 minutes or something. It's probably been longer, but I think that you also have that ability to learn and what I'll call kind of naturalize complex situations quickly, because the question that you're asking means that you're distilling down really fast what this complex thing that I do, which is complex. It's not straightforward by any stretch of the imagination. So I think the reason I bring that up is I think everybody has that ability in one form or another. It's just how we do it, which gets me to your next question. So I think you also have that keen ability as well. Now, how it's done is I tend to just absolutely, my brain gets completely clogged with information pretty quickly. I only have so much capacity, right? A couple things I do. One is I get away from technology completely, and I'll get out in nature and I'll walk or I'll hike or I'll run or whatever. And it's like this background process. I'm not sitting there thinking about this stuff. I'm just thinking about what's around me. And that causes like this background processing to happen, which our brains are so good at doing without us knowing it. And then I'll come back and I'll get a big piece of paper and I'll just brain dump. I mean, I'll get like butcher paper. It's like, I don't know, it's like 3 feet by however long I roll it out. And I just get a marker, like Sharpies. There's like this tactile kind of, I don't know, feedback on my hand. And I just start, sometimes it's pictures, and I'll just see what text comes out of my brain. And then it turns into like a collage almost. And that's usually the genesis of where I'm going when I write something brand new. And then it's terrible. I'm like a pack rat. It's like my office is like a fire hazard. I keep those rolls of paper around. It's terrible. But I don't usually go back and reference them. I don't know why I keep them. It's a total fire hazard. Yeah, I don't know why I do it. Anyway, so that's how it's usually a combination of get out, get away, take a break, get technology out of the picture, get into nature, let your mind do something, go get some exercise, and then just do a complete brain dump. That tends to be my process.
When it comes to the participants going back
Mhm.
to their day job and then doing things,
Mhm.
they probably need to be more aware of themselves and the situations,
Mhm.
and possibly develop empathy for the customers or the users that they're solving the problems for.
Mhm. Mhm.
So how much do they retain after this kind of a workshop, which is experiential,
Yep.
to actually internalize it and then apply it in their day-to-day activities?
Yep. Another great question. Um, the way that I've seen we've I partnered with companies to try a few different methods. The easiest way to do it that has the greatest benefit at the same time is the participants that go through the program, they are then required to go conduct training for their group.
Okay.
Yeah. So what happens is it turns into a train the trainer in a way, right? And usually what we've done kind of back of the napkin basic research on this. And usually if you go 2 layers down, that tends to be the sweet spot. So usually I do kind of VP, director and above type thing. Then that VP or director has to then go conduct training for 25 people on their team, right? Then 1 person or 2 people from that group has to go to conduct training for 25 people. And that tends to kind of permeate this knowledge. And, as we all know, the best way to naturalize new learning is to then teach it, right? And that's a very low friction, very inexpensive way for companies to naturalize this information that's going to help permeate the change that they just went through or about to go through, I guess.
Going to more of the software development domain, nowadays with the expectation that the new features and new products are turned around very quickly, there is also a need for probably dynamic teaming. Teams are not permanent for a very long time.
Yeah.
Even though we say that teams go through all these phases, and by the time they are productive, don't disturb them, etc. So from your experience, do you think that using a simulation approach could help in creating high performing teams much quicker?
So as I mentioned before, a lot of what I do is high performance slash think of like hypo as like kind of a fast track program. It works really, really well in those. It works really, really well in those programs. But it's funny, the hypo programs, they tend to be people that have been in their position maybe 2 years. I'm just going to pick that as an average, and maybe they're a manager, maybe they're not. It's usually a mix actually, which is kind of good for hypo programs. But and it works really well in those, as I said. But to get to the point of when you have an organization that's got a lot of turnover, a lot of change, can these tools be used to bring people up to speed faster? In full transparency, I can't remember a time where it's been used for that, except for once. That was a while ago. It's not something I've seen used for that purpose that often. And I'm guessing the reason why is I'm guessing it's a cost thing. From a cost standpoint, that's a pretty high investment for an organization to invest in people that may have high turnover, right? Yeah. So I would say I haven't seen it used for that purpose a whole lot. In theory, I think it'd be a great tool. The only assumption in there is that the people you train are going to stay for a while, and that's something that's a risk assessment that the organization would have to do themselves. Be a great tool, but only if they're going to stay around for a while. They being the employees.
Yeah. On the lighter side, when I was faced with the situation or some situations like this, I just asked them the question: you are worried about training people and they're leaving. Just imagine the situation when you don't train people and they stay.
Agreed completely. It's a very well-known thing that Berkshire Hathaway owns a good handful of very successful companies. It's a known I mean, I think Warren Buffett's written about it, which is his love of training employees is very well known. He doesn't expect any learning metrics back. He just knows it works, right? And if you look at the companies that the smaller companies, not the Coca-Colas, but if you look at the smaller companies that Berkshire Hathaway invests in, they've got pretty low turnover. They've got a lot of very experienced, a lot of very good managers in there. So I would say there's probably a correlation between just looking at that one case study between the known importance of training with low turnover. I would imagine the correlation rate's pretty high. So completely agree, and that's a great call out.
Yeah, and also it need not be only formal training. Like I am fascinated by this book called The 11 Rings, Phil Jackson. His experience of creating these winning basketball teams. When he was the Chicago Bulls and then with the Lakers, and talking about high intense personalities, like you have Kobe and Jordan and others. Now, how he was able to bring them together as a team. All the other issues, the dynamics, interpersonal dynamics, plus the pressures of performance. I like that. That's why when he had to come in and then put together a team that can consistently deliver.
Yeah, so what's the name of the book? Because I love reading stuff like this.
It's called The 11 Rings.
All right, I gotta look this
because
up.
he got 11 rings.
Oh, that's hysterical. That's great. I can chew through those books. I love that stuff. I love, again, this gets too experiential, right? It's not a book of theory. It's a book of what this leader did. And that's the stuff I can chew when I get through. I mean, I love reading Harvard Review. I don't love reading Harvard Review stuff, but I enjoy it. I find the information useful. But boy, I can't put stuff down if it's real life experiential stuff. So I'm glad you shared that, because the more of those I can find, the better.
Yeah. So that's actually the goal of this podcast as well. Bring in real stories of real people, like you.
Yeah.
So next one, probably as we kind of come towards the close, is what are the limits of simulation?
Oh, that's a great question. And actually, you'd be surprised how often I get a call from companies and I actually say, don't use a sim. I mean, I wrote a book about utilizing sims in games on it. And there's actually, a lot of that book is in a way trying to talk people out of using a sim, because there are incredible limitations. And I would say the first primary core limitation is expectations. A lot of people, they'll bring on a sim thinking that it can do amazing things and do all the teaching and bake bread and solve all the strategy change problems, and it just can't. And the industry I'm in it's a little embarrassing. I think they sell it that way, and they're not. The limitations of the sim are entirely based on the expectations of what you want out of them. So you got to be really careful with that, and also the size of them. So if you make a sim really complicated, way too many decisions, way too many learning objectives, way too many complexities, people will forget why it's all of a sudden it just turns into a game. They're just pushing buttons and pulling levers and turning dials, right? And it becomes a very expensive, very useless exercise. So the limitation of the sim is entirely founded on how somebody uses them, and what I'll say is the size of them. The more focused they are around the core objectives of the change in the learning, the more effective they'll be. If you go outside those parameters, they'll become very quickly detrimental. Not only are they just not effective, they actually can get in the way of learning. And that would be the third piece, is they can most definitely get in the way of effective learning within a leadership development program unless they're used appropriately. So they can actually be a problematic tool. And when a prospective client calls and they describe what they want, I usually ask them, well, what are your expectations? And if we're on bullet point number 50, I'm like, yeah, you gotta focus is your friend here. This is not gonna work. And I'll usually kind of steer them towards something that's, not what I do if they're really insistent on that. So definitely limitations to it. That's actually an important question that listeners should understand, is that they can be used in what I'll say is incorrectly, I guess.
Yeah, last question. I can't avoid this kind of topical,
Sure.
which is after you go through a sim, you kind of do things. How do you handle what we may call as the black swan kind of situations, where
Mhm.
suddenly there is this takeover that happens? Somebody pays $1 billion and then everything kind
Mhm.
of changes overnight, like what you're seeing recently.
Yeah. You mean utilizing sim before or after that?
Before, no, you are on a path,
Yeah.
and then suddenly things change.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
At least as an individual, does it help
mhm.
me be prepared to handle uncertainty?
So the short answer is yes. There's by far the most popular sim that we run is called the Strategic Thinker, and it's to teach people strategic thinking. There's a lot of components that go into strategic thinking, right? There's business acumen, financial acumen, marketing acumen, behavioral. I'm just calling all these things acumen. Behavioral capabilities, innovative thinking. But a big component of that is what I'll call corporate resilience, right?
Mm.
And the sim definitely has a component in there where it teaches you to be resilient to change, right? So if you go through the sim and you actually really grok and naturalize that capability, that competency, then yeah, you should be able to roll with the punches because you've been through it in the sim, right? In theory. So yeah, the strategic thinker program is big because it does definitely have a huge component of, hey, how do you quickly adapt positively to change, not just reel back and get resistant, but you kind of lean forward and really kind of lean into it and adjust with the new changes that have come. So yeah, I mean, in theory, yes.
Yeah, that's great. So on that high note, thank you once again, Bill. I learned a lot, and it seems to be a very exciting area to be in. And thanks for
Well,
sharing
thank you.
your perspectives.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. And I got to say, your questions are incredibly unusually insightful very quickly. So I think this
Thank you.
is something that you would enjoy a lot. So it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.